something that we're seeing as an emerging issue around boys and young men is the increase in younger young men who are being groomed and exploited by offenders to carry out sexual offences against other young people. So, for example, you might have, I'll use the example in a gang situation, you might have a young man who is part of a gang who, as part of his initiation, for example, is forced to have sex with another young person or other young people, male or female. Part of that is to cement their status within the gang, but there's also something in there around the power and control of the gang and the power and control element of that. And also, it's also likely that continuing that gang involvement will encourage that young person to, or will force that young person into committing other sexual offences moving forward against other young people. And I think also we've seen it not just in gang situations where boys and young men have been groomed and exploited by adults to kind of be the hook to start the grooming process with other girls. So it could be, for example, quite an attractive looking 17-year-old male who's kind of groomed by older adults to encourage young people to believe that they're in a relationship with him, and he will then pass those young people on to be abused by older adults. And I think there's a really close link and something we need to be really mindful of around some of the young men that are committing some of these sexually exploitative behaviours and sexual offending behaviours are actually victims of grooming and exploitation themselves. And it's about how we manage the complexities around these abused recruiters or abused offenders, and the fact that yes, they're sex offenders potentially, but actually first and foremost they're children and victims themselves quite often. So there's something there, I think, about boys and young men that's often slightly different to girls. It's very rare that we see girls groomed into committing sexual offences. We might see girls groomed into introducing peers or other young girls into exploitation, but we rarely see them being groomed and exploited into committing sexual offences. So I think there's something there around how we manage that. And it's something that we're getting a lot better at. I think the criminal justice agencies, particularly the police, are getting a lot better at considering the potential for an offender in terms of what their victim, whether they're potentially victims as well, with females and with males, because historically somebody over the age of 18 who was engaged in committing sexual assaults and sexual exploitation related offences would automatically be assumed as being a bad guy. But actually, and they, don't get me wrong, they're committing offences, they're committing sexual offences, they are a bad guy, but actually there might be something there around their kind of grooming and exploitation that they've experienced as well. And again, particularly in gang situations where young people who are in gangs are more likely to be vulnerable to wider forms of exploitation, so criminal exploitation and as well as the sexual exploitation. Essentially they're viewed as a commodity, so they will be used in as many ways as they can be to make money. And that will include the boys being involved in recruiting other young men and also more likely young women into sexual exploitation for that reason.